We're live.
All right, welcome everybody to House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. It's Wednesday, February 4th, and we are here diving into testimony on H740, which is an act relating to the greenhouse gas inventory. So we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves, and then we'll turn it over to you. I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Morrow and the Windsor Bennington. Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Darren Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kleppner, 13 Burlington.
Great, and who do we have in the room?
Lauren Ashbrook, Climate Action Office, Agency of Natural Resources.
Great.
Zoe Thomas, Senator Rebecca White, intern.
Super.
Allison Deskassi, Vermonters for the Environment. Great.
Jared Duvall, member of the Vermont Climate Council.
Great. All right. For the record.
For the record, I'm Julie Moore. I'm the Secretary of Natural Resources.
And for the record, Jean Lazarchuk, I work in the Climate Action Office for the Agency of Natural Resources.
So thank you for having us in this morning and allowing us the opportunity to provide some input on H740. I want to start by just offering kind of some high-level feedback on the overall approach. We do have a small number of requested edits and then really want to talk about funding for the work. Great. So as discussed when we were last here a couple of weeks ago, the Climate Action Plan update that was adopted by the Vermont Climate Council in July of 2025 did include this following request to ANR, asking us to develop a framework for the reporting of greenhouse gas emissions data. And that was delivered to the council, but also to the respective legislative committees in December of last year. Just in terms of the overall approach, we are supportive of the idea of amending Section 582 to add a new Section 2 to provide that clear authorization for a reporting program. As we talked about when we were previously, having that clarity in direction from the legislature we feel is really important, and thank you for including that in the bill. In terms of proposed edits, there is one piece around the Secretary's authority. We have suggested an edit here, but also can talk about what the concern is and are open to alternative approaches. But as drafted, I think there's concern that this would actually capture all greenhouse gas emitters of any size and any scale, as opposed to allowing us to focus on sort of the most significant of sources. I think that gets captured in the final sentence where you're directing at a minimum what types of information should be collected. And by saying instead of the Secretary shall adopt rules that create this, the Secretary shall have authority to adopt rules, provides them the flexibility for the agency to figure out sort of where we draw a line around de minimis sources.
Can we stop right here? Because we had a good starting conversation about this bill just an hour ago or whenever it was. And so I have some questions about this. So my first, and maybe language later in the bill, will remove this concern. But my question about that is, shall adopt rules seems very clear to me, like you will do the rules.
Yes.
Shall have the authority to adopt the rules sounds like, well, you have the authority, but you can do it or not if you want to. So that
I actually asked the same very question of our council and
Have it right here.
Okay.
For you.
Oh,
I got it.
okay. And she said, another approach would be to alter that final sentence that currently says the information collected shall include at a minimum to say the Secretary shall adopt a rule that at a minimum includes. So if you want to make it is not our intention in offering this edit to make doing this work optional. It is to provide us the ability to, as I say, draw a line below de minimis sources. And so altering that final line, and happy to send that proposed language to you as well, Chair James, could maybe accomplish both goals of both giving us flexibility to determine what is actually in to create a manageable program and ensure that it is clear the legislative intent is for us to proceed.
I'd love to see that, because that was my first concern. It makes it sound super, like if you feel like it, and that, that's not,
Mhm.
certainly not that wouldn't be my intent.
Yes.
And, okay,
Just that one other edit at the top, even moving forward, but we can send this to you, but our general counsel suggested that the top change to the secretary has authority to adopt rules, which gives us that clear authority in this instance. And then further on, as the secretary just alluded to, the change then becomes at the bottom and clarifies, the secretary shall adopt a rule that strikes information collected shall, and goes right into at a minimum includes.
I would
So
love to see that. And then Rep. Klepner has a comment that probably gets to all sources of emissions.
Yes, because I also read the bill and was concerned about the
Yeah.
all sources. As we have discussed, we do not want to interfere with someone throwing some split wood into their wood stove when it gets cold.
Correct.
And it would be spectacularly difficult to collect the data. And if we did, it would be all kinds of bad implications of doing that. So I think being clear that we're not trying to regulate that. On the other hand, as we look to a greenhouse gas inventory that's meaningful, whatever the reporting format is, it feels to me as though we should include the generating sector as well, particularly McNeil and Rygate as our largest sources of CO2. And we did hear earlier that you already get emissions data from them. Is that accurate?
We have emissions information from them through their clean air permits. So they report to our air quality and climate division right now in DC. And I believe the last time we were in here, one of the main arguments for giving the secretary discretion to consider sources beyond the transportation, residential, commercial, industrial is to consider facilities. And our mitigation team within the Climate Action Office continues to do research on the facilities that have over the last 5 to 10 years come on and off that tracking with the EPA GREET tool to understand who those facilities are that would meet some minimum threshold to be potentially considered under a reporting program, and to understand if there are entities where we would learn more about their use around emissions that we aren't getting through fossil fuel suppliers. Understanding that most of those facilities that are reporting through GREET are in large part reporting there because of their fossil fuel use. So much would be double counting. Mm-hmm. That said, there are entities such as Global Foundries that we would have different emissions that would trigger a threshold around process emissions. And we've been trying to understand the value in a recommendation to consider those entities and at what threshold. EPA is a 25,000 metric tons per year threshold. New York's reporting rule is a 10,000 metric ton reporting for facilities. And so we don't have a clear recommendation to the secretary yet formed about that, but our team just met yesterday to continue to investigate the rationale for why we would include them.
And that's 10,000 tons, I presume 10,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalents.
Yes.
And that would then, if there were a minimum facility requirement like that, it would capture the facilities that produce at that level, sort of regardless of the fuel.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Exactly.
That would make me really happy, which I know is your main reason for coming here.
So I would encourage the committee to hear from representatives of those two generating facilities. I think this introduces complications with some of their renewable energy credits and other components of their work. And so just before proceeding in that space, to make sure, I can't speak to the ramifications, but just know that they exist.
Thank you for that. We did discuss earlier that the possibility of including it in a separate section of the report, or something, whatever is required to avoid those problems, so that we can get the data without screwing anything up.
I also understand that the two entities, McNeil and Rygate, do not meet a 25,000 CO2 equivalent annually. And there's been variation back and forth whether or not they even met 10,000. So they're just to flag that those based on how other states, and if we were to consider facilities, we would want to do it consistent with our neighboring state, New York. Those two entities would not be captured unless there was some other thing beyond that facility's 10,000 or 25,000 threshold.
Got it. Thank you.
So how would this inventory compare with what you have been collecting for greenhouse gas emissions already, which captures a wider spectrum of sources, right? And it's sort of all is the idea.
Yes.
And would implementing this reduce the efforts that you have if the other inventory? It sounds like that would cover more sources than just heating and transportation. But if we're doing this, then we wouldn't have to collect heating and transportation and the other system, right?
Yeah, I mean, in that the system right now is that we get that data through DMV and the tax department. And then there have actually been most recently inconsistencies and like a timestamp on when we get that data. And so this would create one system consistently used on those to calculate the emissions from those, creating less challenges around sort of like the time we get that data and when partners get that data to calculate emissions. So that's one. The other big challenge has been that those entities do not collect detailed information on biofuels and the biofuel content of fuels used in transportation or home heating. So that has been one of the big arguments or considerations for how we would then be able to require and ask for that data in a reporting program.
But just to add to that though, I don't believe as currently structured, our data collection would replace some of the needs that DMV and tax have. We did mention last time this ability to look at reverse harmonization.
Right.
But that is not anything we're prepared to recommend at this point. So it would be asking entities to file a second separate report with the Agency of Natural Resources that we would then rely on for the inventory, but they would continue to need to report to tax and DMV.
Yeah, what I was getting at, and I did evidently I say it very well, you're collecting data now for the GHG inventory, broadly speaking, that includes processed fuels and other sources, right? So by implementing this system just around heating and transportation, that is much more rigorous, and so would require you setting up your own sort of data input to collect that. You wouldn't have to then translate data from DMV or from other sources. So that would save you some time there. Right? I guess I'm just wondering what you're estimating.
Not necessarily, right? We're still going to have to do the same kind of work. We're just doing it on our data set as opposed to using a DMV or tax-based data set, right? Like I think the workload remains for the agency and may actually increase because of some of the granularity of the information we've indicated would be supportive of the type of reporting program being envisioned here. So I don't know that it produces any time savings on our end, and does currently require a second report from the fuel producers or suppliers.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Software?
Where does Vermont rank currently in greenhouse gas emissions? Nationwide.
On a per capita or a net base total? Total? Do you know?
Last 50th.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we're at the bottom.
Much
We're highest in New England.
yeah, those are the top on per capita. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, Rep. Clifner and then Southworth,
On the subject of data.
or I'm sorry.
Some- So I think I heard you say that McNeil might not emit 25,000 tons a year,
CO2 equivalent. Mhm.
which struck me as odd. So I did a quick search, which reported it's like 400,000 tons a year.
It was just the information I received yesterday and talking about what they report through the GREET tool and how they don't trigger reporting in the GREET tool. And so I'm happy to follow back up with understanding that. But they're not currently reporting through that, which is the federal data.
Madam Chair and Secretary Moore, I apologize for stepping in late and hope I have not missed critical information. I'm looking at the slide here and assuming that this is a request from the agency related to the bill that's in front of us. And the language on the top is the language that is currently in the bill, which says that you shall adopt rules. And the language on the bottom with have authority to boldened changes that from making that a requirement to giving you the authority to adopt it, which then makes it optional.
We talked about that at length.
Okay.
So
Did we also talk about, did anybody ask? I think you have broad authority right now with, did we talk about that with the GWSA? Yeah, I mean, I think you have broad authority right now with the Global Warming Solutions Act to promulgate rules. And so why is this authority necessary?
So, given the experience of other states that have stood up reporting programs, they've received legal challenges where explicit authority was not provided for such to the implementing agency. And we have a second alternative to the language here. This is really intended to give us discretion about where to draw a line at de minimis sources, not intended to give us discretion about whether or not we would adopt a rule if the legislature moves this forward.
Okay, so you're open or supportive of us giving you the authority and requiring you to do it.
Assuming it comes with the resources to do the work, yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite have time to grab Burlington Electric's own report, but they did report 375,000 tons of CO2 emissions in 2023. So
I'm only being speculative, but obviously most of those emissions are from burning wood, so we don't count those in the inventory.
right.
So I'm wondering, I will follow up because my staff gave me a presentation on it yesterday and I wish I could recite, but the emissions they were citing in the slides were just under 10,000.
No,
So it must be
very likely they're just reporting the diesel emissions from transporting timber to the facility and
exactly
that sort of thing, rather than the actual smokestack emissions, which is the one number that I would like to understand and track.
and, sorry, before we move to the next slide, I just want to learn a little bit more about because I know this has come up a lot in previous conversations in the legislature. Suppliers of transportation and heating fuels. Who is that in Vermont? Who are those companies? Who are those entities?
So I can take a stab at it, but I expect that the question best put to somebody like Matt Coda.
Yeah, he's coming in.
Okay. That there are a handful of points of entry for our fuel supply. The Port of Albany, significant amount of fossil fuel comes out of Montreal and Quebec. And then I think to a lesser degree, there are supply or fuel depots in New Hampshire and Massachusetts that some suppliers access. So it depends a bit on who the enterprise is, where they are picking up their fuel from. But generally the first location that those fuel supplies make landfall in the continental US is outside Vermont's boundaries. I don't know if that answers your question well or not.
Just who's going to be required to report? Is it it's not the big wholesaler in Albany or Montreal. It's the company that's importing that, bringing that fossil fuel
Picks
into
it
our
up
state.
from one of those places.
Okay. Great. Alrighty.
So the current draft asks us to file with LCAR by March 1st of 2027. We are asking that be replaced with either a deadline to submit to ICAR, which it sort of is our starting line for the process, or an adopt by date, as both of those are a bit more within our control than the LCAR timing. Specifically, we would propose to adopt the rule by July 1st of 2027, but also want to be clear Any adoption date in 2027 would mean that the first reporting year under this rule would be 2028. And then generally looking at New York as an example, reports are due 6 months into the following year. So we would be looking at receiving reports in June, July of 2029, covering calendar year 2028.
I would have to understand better the practical difference between LCAR and ICAR. LCAR is our own legislative body that would review the rules to make sure that they meet our legislative intent. ICAR is the executive branch.
Correct, interagency committee.
So the legislature would not have a chance to weigh in on the rules that.
Well, you would through LCAR. So ICAR is sort of the starting line for any rule. The way our process works is a rule is filed with ICAR. If ICAR approves it, we then file with the Secretary of State's office the draft and start the public comment process. Once we have completed a public comment period, prepared a responsiveness summary, and developed any or created any revisions to the rule as a result of the comment received, we then go to LCAR. And then coming out of LCAR, after there's ideally confirmation this is consistent with legislative intent, we file the final rule with the Secretary of State's office. It's just sort of midstream in the process.
Exactly. So it's either like it exactly as the secretary just spoke. It's a challenging date when you have it in the middle of the process, and we'd rather you either indicate when we must file with ICAR, which is typically from filing with ICAR roughly like 6 months to 9 months till we complete the rule, or an adopt by date, which would signal the completion, and we would be working towards that goal and work backwards from there. And so a July 1st, 2027 adoption by is not inconsistent with the March LCAR filing, because it would take a few months beyond the first meeting with the LCAR to actually complete the rule. So it's not largely out of step with the timing you have now. And then the dates, this was something that we reached out and reviewed New York's rule. If folks are unaware, they adopted their rule by December of this year.
Yeah.
And they're now in that first emissions reporting year of 26, with their first reporting occurring in July 1st of 27. And so our hope would be that we would complete the rule by July 27 and look at 28 as a registry year to get folks used to reporting and working with us, with the first official year being 29 for the 28 emissions. And that would all be spelled out in the details of the rule as we put it forward. But in order to have 27, we would have to complete the rulemaking by the end of this year, with this currently being discussed, no resources yet put at it, and the amount of stakeholder engagement required by a rule in the Global Warming Solutions Act, which goes above and beyond what the APA requires. The APA for rules require you hold a hearing. The Global Warming Solutions Act, when rules are proposed in a climate action plan, requires statewide engagement with frontline and impacted communities. Requires a higher bar for public engagement and therefore a longer timeline. So we don't feel like it is possible to complete the rule by the end of this year.
Okay.
And then just to reiterate what we see is the necessary budget. This was part of the memo that was submitted to the committee back in December. It's 2 FTEs, as well as $200,000 in base funding to maintain the platform, and third-party verification, and $300,000 in one-time money. The current draft of 740 indicates just $800,000 in one-time money. And so making clear that there is a base funding component to this request or this need. And so ensuring that moves forward. Also, the draft is currently silent on positions. The position pool, which is the sometimes source of new positions when they are funded through the legislature, is virtually empty. And so in order to ensure the capacity exists, the bill would also, I would suggest need to create the positions on top of providing that funding.
Can we go back a slide? And so the base is for the staff time, it's for the,
So the top line is it's about, we estimate positions at $150,000, and that's sort of salary plus benefits.
Okay.
So there are 2 FTEs required, one person who's essentially managing the program and a second person who's really doing kind of the compliance data verification components of the work. And then at the bottom, that third line is the ongoing cost of actually having a platform that entities can report into and through. As well as doing third-party verification. Obviously, this work, as it could support future policy programs that have real economic consequences, ensuring that all of the data we have is verified is important to making sure we're providing a level playing field to regulated entities.
so regarding the FTEs, what, these are climate action, would these be climate office employees? Okay, and
That is the proposal.
what's the current staffing at the climate office?
8.
And what was it last year?
8.
And what was it in the budget this year?
8.
And so how much time, you all have just finished the climate action plan, which presumably is a lot of time. You know, is any of this work able to be, you know, this greenhouse gas work, would any of it be able to be absorbed by existing staff? Have you thought about that at all?
We have looked at that, and frankly, there is more work in front of the climate office than they are able to do. We have worked to right size their efforts through the climate action planning process. I think Jared could probably speak to it as well, but I would say we took a step back from the level of support we provided to the climate action plan this go round as compared to the first plan, in recognition of the other tasks that sit with the climate action team. And we don't have the capacity to take up this work within our existing staff resources.
If I may just add, I'll just say much of the work done through the Climate Council and in support of the Climate Action Plan is done through 2 ways: a contract with external resources through the Consensus Building Institute that brings agenda planning, process planning, as well as meeting support through that contract, and we benefit from that in the office. And then second, this time we had a position, the first climate action plan, myself and Marion Wool supported it almost full time. In this time, we have a limited service position that provided administrative capacity as well as support to the climate action plan through the climate planning administrator. That position is funded through the climate pollution reduction grant, which ends July 1st of 2027. So if we were even to look across resources, that person is filling different resources now in our office, but that person who was really supporting the council is also termed out in a year from now, because those funds will finish July 1st, 2027.
Preparatory. I'm just thinking back, I know you had a lot of work going on around data and you had grant funding for it. Is any of that work tangentially related to this? Like, does this support the mission of that funding? And is that funding still in your?
So we continue to seek opportunities largely through the U.S. Climate Alliance. They've been sort of the principal grant funder we have had success with, other than this climate pollution reduction planning grant that was a non-competitive grant issued by EPA to any state that effectively put their hands up as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's the funding Jane is talking about. We have had good success with U.S. Climate Alliance being willing to fund certain initiatives, but they tend to be one-time funds, right? So they've been working with us, looking at some of the unanswered questions we had about agricultural contributions. Trying to think that there was one in the forestry sector too, that the Climate
They
Alliance.
supported our climate change forester for a period of time in forest parks and recreation. We currently have, we referenced this last time we were here, we currently have a grant through them to support workforce development in the
Right,
climate
that-
space with the Department of Labor. and have two applications in right now. One looking at a sequestration adder on farms, so that when you're going out to resilience planning with them, how can they calculate sequestration of the sequestration benefits of practices they're deploying? And then a second application to look at Bovaer as a foods supplement for cows in partnership with Ben and Jerry's, who is very interested in this, to think about the benefits of, and if it's cost effective to add a food adder for cows around methane reduction.
But I think the long story short there is that they really provide one-time funding and not base appropriations for this type of work.
But the climate pollution reduction grant was a $3 million grant that has supported a new staff member in our office, and also provided $1 million in technical services funding, as well as funding that we've used to both maximize the climate policy study we did around at Cap and Invest that led to this recommendation from the Climate Council, as well as a grant that supports a thermal program manager in Public Service Department. So they have a staff member looking at thermal program efficiency, Ben Velasky, that's paid for through that grant. But all of those funds are apportioned out because they have to be spent down now within a year. And if we hadn't envisioned how to obligate them by now, we wouldn't be successful. So they're all spoken for.
Mom?
Can you just say a little bit more about the program management? You have someone doing compliance and enforcement, data analysis and verification, and platform maintenance already with that one FTE. What does management mean in this context?
Do you want to talk a little bit about what you learned from New York in terms of how they're?
Yeah, happy to. A lot of the work in the act of standing up the rule for the first, 1.5 to 2 years will be around the rulemaking process and stakeholder engagement. So developing the rule package, the economic analysis, and all the supporting documents that go into preparing a rulemaking. There's also significant stakeholder engagement with the entities to prime them for the possibility of how this will move forward, have their feedback be responsive. And so much of that work in the early time looks at how to successfully stand up that program and link it then ultimately with the development of the greenhouse gas inventory, to understand how we successfully transition that data into the inventory. And beyond that, it really is about how to think about what third-party verification looks like, not enforcing for a number of years. You may recall in our memo that we put forward, we don't propose to have any formal enforcement relationship with these entities for a number of years, rather than us building relationship and working to support them to enter the data. So that's really a program function in the climate office to think about what compliance and enforcement looks like in a not in a sort of interface that isn't always positive kind of way with enforcement. So that most of that program work would all live within that person. And then obviously building the tool that person would need to manage either an external contract or an ADS, an Agency of Digital Services relationship, to stand up and build the platform that the folks would be entering into.
So $300,000 is strictly for the technical platform itself,
Correct, creating that online tool.
but not paying for someone to do that.
Right.
Okay.
It's the the contract to build the tool.
Do you have a sense for how many entities order of magnitude are going to be reporting?
Matt will speak to that very obviously tomorrow when he testifies. And I wish the PUC there were roughly 40. I don't want to speak out of turn and get it wrong, but there were the fuel, there's the residential, commercial, industrial heating, and then transportation fuel suppliers.
Yeah.
We have estimated it is similar to the size of Massachusetts reporting program for just the residential, commercial, industrial sector. So we felt like our information and numbers that we based here is very in line with the numbers for staff and resources needs based on what Massachusetts is doing in the heating sector alone. And ours, we think across both sectors will be similar to Massachusetts heating sources.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I just caught the end of that. Why is Vermont's landscape be similar to Massachusetts?
We think the totality of the transportations, fuel suppliers and the RCI sector, the heating sector suppliers is similar in number to the suppliers of just the heating sector in Massachusetts. Through conversations we've had with Massachusetts and
The number of
supply of
places you have to
entities.
go to get information.
Correct. We just, we're trying to have
Yeah.
something we could scale against in
Yeah,
bringing you
yeah.
this proposal.
Sure, right. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
I missed a turn.
We have reached out to our partners in Massachusetts and New York who we base these numbers from on to just consider any reports or references they could share with us that we would be happy to send as files for you all so that you can see that these numbers are based in actualities in neighboring states.
So, you're obviously totally correct in that I just took the 800K and dumped it into the bill because I knew we'd be having these conversations. So I want to, I guess I just want to emphasize how important I feel this work is. And I was really gratified, to see that this was one of the top 10, policy recommendations of the climate action plan, that the climate action plan passed with only one, with 22 supporting votes and only one dissent, and really happy to see in your own memos.
Sorry, 2 dissents. I think Agency of Agriculture dissented in that.
I think actually 4.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I think there's a few.
Okay, I was just reading the signing statement.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay, so with overwhelming support.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah, and because I was just looking at the signing statements this morning, but I stand corrected. And I appreciate the memo from the two of you, and Treasurer Pichek's position that this is foundational work. And so I don't believe there's much disagreement that this is really important. And so I feel like I feel well aware that this is going to come down to the money. And so, I had hoped, but wasn't actually very hopeful that it would be included in the governor's budget recommend. I know it's not. And so I wonder about the timeline. Like how granular can we get about the realistic, you do not need an $800,000 check tomorrow. So how realistic can we get about the timeline of this work? If you had been able to put funding into the FY27 budget, what would you have needed right now to get started?
I guess I would say, in reality, you would have sought the full $500,000 of base funding increase and the $300,000 of one-time money. We can't enter into a contract absent having the full resources available, and found ourselves in I would say, unenviable position with the Flood Safety Act several years ago, where we were given 15 positions, but only sufficient money for 11, saying, well, they're not going to start July 1st. So here's funding for 9 months for those positions. The problem is then when I start my budget build the next year, I start in the hole. The way it works with our budget advisor directions that we receive from finance and management is they tell us to assume a certain percentage increase over last year's general fund allocation. And so to the extent you provide partial funding for an ongoing need, we have to figure out a way then to absorb that in our budget, which would mean making cuts elsewhere.
And how strongly do you support this work?
I see this is really important to having a solid foundation for any future conversations that are desired around cap and invest, clean heat standard. All of those policy pieces have been effectively flying blind without this information. We have heard from partners in other states that you need several years of this data to have that kind of grounding to ensure you're not having disproportionate impacts on low and moderate income Vermonters. And so to the extent that remains a priority for this body, I think having a robust greenhouse gas reporting program is an essential first step. I will say, in terms of our inventory, which was the initial concern we had as practitioners in this space, and frankly, because it's the basis of the Global Warming Solutions Act enforcement components, the progress we've made with tax and DMV on data sharing has helped fill what was a really, I would say, significant gap or lag in our greenhouse gas reporting efforts. So it not only depends on, I think the answer is, it also depends on where you want to go, right? And if this is ultimately pushing towards designing an economy-wide or a sector-based emissions reduction program, this is essential work.
Rep. Sibilia?
I just want to make sure I understand. Did you say this what was not or would be helpful for the GWSA?
I was saying, I'm sure this will have incremental value in the GWSA and improving the quality of our inventory, particularly as Jane said, because we don't receive information right now on biofuels versus fossil fuels. So we just are making assumptions in that space. But the lion's share of the gain was made in the work we have done to obtain better and more timely data from tax and DMV, including tax modifying their reporting forms to give us granularity that simply didn't exist several years ago.
Okay. And so I just want to double check the question of whether or not you support this. Did you answer? I mean, I think I heard you say it's important if we have objectives. But do you think that this is important?
I do. I think the question then becomes, there's a lot of important things we are asked to work on every year and how this fits. And saying that it has to be with a vision towards what the future use of that data is. What I was intending to convey is that the work we have done with tax and DMV over the last several years has met the existing need we have as an agency, which is we didn't have the types of information we needed to have sort of the best possible greenhouse gas inventory. I think it's not a surprise that this an economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions reduction effort is not high on the governor's list of priorities, which is why I indicated if it is a priority for the legislature, this information is foundational to our ability to design a credible program.
And it will improve your ability to track progress for the GWSA.
Correct, incrementally, yes.
Just to put a finer point on what the secretary's alluded to around improvements over the last few years, tax in particular have worked very closely with us. They were collecting data as lump sum of fuels, and they've been able to break it out into different fuel types so that we're able, all those fuel types have different emission factors. And that was something only a few years ago, 3 or so years ago, was changed. So when the secretary refers to better data through our partnerships with state government, that's what she's referring to, the fuel. But we've gone as sort of far as we can with tax for them to approve their reporting fuel forms. Collecting information on biofuels is not something that is germane to what they tax. So it's not something they'll ask to split out.
So I just have a quick question about this. So in your memo, you had, it sounds like, considered both the harmonization and the standalone approaches, and concluded that standalone would be better. Is it that harmonization is not possible, or just that standalone would be better?
I think it's probably both. Standalone is better because harmonization is still going to have some of the gaps, particularly around biofuels. Just in that isn't anything tax is that sort of tucks into the reporting tax is already mandated to perform. And then there's some of the sharing arrangements with tax that further complicate that.
But the sharing arrangements with tax could I mean, couldn't we direct tax to share the information you need?
You should hear from them directly.
Well, I'm
They-
sure, but
Yeah, they have significant concerns about sharing any additional detail beyond what they are currently providing to us.
Namely the dealer, namely the entity. So, and this gets to the secretary's point about like your vision for this data. If we would, it's the regulated and the potentially regulated entity down the line.
right,
That is not something tax shares
Right.
with us. Yeah.
currently unregulated.
Yes.
Right, but they-
currently unregulated.
We just get the numbers. We don't actually get the who.
Yeah, Rep. Sibilia. Well, I'm sorry.
I'm next. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to observe and make explicit that this is a foundational piece for future policy. And the governor, the kind of priority of the governor. So I just want that. And the other piece that I'm having a hard time reconciling in my own head is the need for staff positions and funding on an ongoing basis. I certainly can understand a need for setting this up and developing rules and managing the contract for setting up the software and all of that. But on an ongoing basis, there's got to be some reduction in labor for you all to be doing this instead of what you're doing now for the greenhouse gas.
I think I would say we don't know what we don't know. We are relying on input from other states as
Yeah.
well. I think the PUC crafted their own estimates of what they believed it would take to fully implement this program, and it may be worthy to hear from them as well. This is our best estimate of what we believe is needed. And I'm very reluctant, given the sort of overall challenging fiscal position of the state as well as my agency, to underestimate
Sure.
and assume we can make it up elsewhere, because we just don't have any capacity.
So I kind of want to, I hope the chair will indulge me. I feel like the question is being begged here. And, you have explained to us that, market style mechanism, which this would be critical for, as well as the Global Warming Solutions Act, which you are required to make sure we are making progress on and have rulemaking authority to do so. With fossil fuels being so volatile and that sector, I mean, we're seeing consolidation here of the market in Vermont, and they are unregulated. That flashes warning signs for Vermonters, unregulated monopolies in a volatile market. And so the question I think that I would like to ask is, how does the governor envision we will protect poor and vulnerable Vermonters from that type of an economic environment?
I haven't had that conversation with them to be able to even offer that kind of response to that question. I do think questions about the appropriateness of regulating these markets probably are better put to public service and the PUC, since they're engaged in that work when it comes to electricity and other components of the energy space. A&R is really there on the environmental end.
I would just say I am deeply, deeply interested in the answer to that question. I don't think that the absence of regulation is actually going to do it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and I even want to back it up a step to say that, I think this is a really important conversation. But to me, it's out ahead of what we're even talking about.
Right.
doing here. What we're talking about, and what I had really hoped and hope, and we'll be working really hard to achieve this year, is the very foundational step of getting the data that you say you need to build good policy in the future, whatever that is. And I think my sense of uh, urgency revolves around what I was talking about earlier when I introduced the bill as the sponsor earlier this morning, which is that, we talk about greenhouse gas emissions reductions, which sounds like a number off in a science lab somewhere that nobody cares about. But how we achieve those reductions is by helping individual Vermonters weatherize their homes, get into a more, this is grassroots, really important work that helps individual people save a lot of money by transitioning to more sustainable and healthy fuel sources. And so I'm super focused on the individual people we're helping. And we keep hitting a brick wall when we try to get big policies in place to get that done. We keep running into the upfront costs. And we hit a brick wall, and we hit a brick wall, and we hit a brick wall. And so it fills me almost with like despair to think that we're going to say, all right, we can't do any of those things right now, but we can start getting the numbers we need. And oops, sorry, we can't afford it. Like, that is very frustrating to me. This is a major reset of like, okay, what can we do now? And to say, well, we've got this great idea, and it's really just an emissions reporting framework, but we can't afford that either. I don't buy it. And I think if we can't take this simple step now, we won't even be seeing those numbers until 2029, that is just a huge fail on all of our collective parts, not just what the legislature wants. And so I really hope we can work together to find a solution. I'm sorry, I know that was a monologue, but you guys know a lot of us have been here in the building for a long time trying to get this work done collaboratively. And it's like, I feel like this is something we should be able to make happen this year. So.
Along those lines, could we ask you to go back, sharpen your pencils and go back and see what you actually really can do about sharing the work among your staff?
So what we may be able to do in that space is suggest things you would have us stop doing in order to start doing this work. But there is no capacity within my team to take on new work. Okay. And so if this is a higher priority, it doesn't obviate the need for the base funding for the tool or the one-time money to develop the tool. That $500,000 or $200,000 and $300,000 respectively doesn't exist elsewhere. Mm-hmm. We may be able to create some staff capacity, but it would require you to allow us to stop doing other things you've directed us to do.
Okay, so that would be helpful to understand that. Thank you.
You're partner tomorrow.
I would also say I don't have any questions at all about you're not having additional capacity, knowing a little bit about your staffing and the workload and all the things that are asked of you. But I do wonder if sort of that model has limitations, and we can think about all of the cool stuff we can do now with automation and AI. Like, if there's a way to automate this so you don't need as many people, find some teenager and ask them for a proposal, because in the business world, one of the big themes this year is those who don't automate are going to go out of business, because there are so many ways that things can be automated now without requiring adding new people, are expensive and hard to find, and all the other things we know about humans.
To clarify, you probably mentioned this, but you clarify that what extra data this would get us. Mentioned the biofuels, but you also mentioned your increased data from tax. So specifically, what data is this going to get us that we don't have now?
It would have us build relationships with individual suppliers. What we get from tax is sort of a lump, right? So many gallons of kerosene, so many gallons of propane, so many gallons of heating fuel number two. We don't know who provided those things. Right. And that's intentional to protect what they see as confidential information. But I don't know what came from Irving versus White versus Bournes. And if we are ultimately intending to develop a regulatory framework on suppliers, we need that kind of granular information. So in addition to the biofuels piece, some of the stationary sources that Jane and her team are continuing to wrestle with, really the answer is about building that record with individual suppliers as opposed to just statewide consumption patterns.
So it's not actually greenhouse gas emissions data, it's data on the sources or the
It's source and tying buckets of greenhouse gas emissions data to individual suppliers.
okay, and the biofuel. And was there a third component you said?
Stationary sources is a piece we're still digging into whether or not that should be part of this framework, but that isn't something that we currently receive information.
And we'll give me an example of a station. Are we talking like McNeil kind of thing?
Global foundries,
Foundries.
places with their own generation capacity.
And different emissions that don't come from fossil
Correct.
fuels, they come from process emissions.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something I was gonna say, but it left.
No,
Oh, it came back. The comment I was just going to make, just to be strict and clear on the record, is that these fuel dealers will be still reporting fuel like sources, not asked to calculate their emissions, and that is something that had been talked about at the Climate Council at a public meeting, creating concern that we would be creating a burden on fuel dealers to actually calculate their emissions. That is not, we're not asking them to report anything other than they already know the amount of fuel, the volumes they have, and we will do the calculation.
That's actually really helpful. I'd forgotten. You did
Yes.
mention that earlier, and that's, I think, really important
Yes,
when we talk about, burden.
yes. Yeah.
We're asking them to report sales volume, which I can only assume is not difficult.
Correct. Foundational to their business.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, so if tax is collecting all this data, they just don't want to release the fuel dealer for obvious reasons. But this would get that data. I mean, couldn't we just have the fuel dealers allow tax to give you that data and not create a whole new?
Would encourage you to hear from the tax department. Our experience has been they have a lot of concerns over that sort of approach, and it's not specific to this sector of the economy. It's that it could throw open doors that they have worked very hard to have remain closed.
It's essentially, in their view, mission creep to why they collect that information, and that's the throwing the doors open around data collection. And so we did run by our reporting memo that we provided to the legislature with both tax and the DMV prior to submitting it to ensure they would support a standalone program rather than a harmonization program, and they were supported with our recommendation. But they were more than happy to speak to that.
Red Clipper and then Southwoods or the other way around.
I've already talked plenty.
So-
First.
In other words, they feel that it may be proprietary information.
I think it's sort of, I would say it's more like personally identifiable information, but business information.
And I was just gonna ask, it sounds like you will collect all the info that tax collects. I mean, they know who the individuals are in the quantities. You'll know who the individuals are in the quantities. Could you collect all that information and they get it from you instead of collecting it twice?
So that's the idea of reverse harmonization. It's something that's out there. I think it's complicated.
You said you looked at it.
Well, I wouldn't say we've taken it off the table,
Okay.
but it isn't something we're prepared to recommend out of the gate.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, Victoria?
Just curious, in other states, is the Climate Action Office funded differently? Like, is it funded the way the Public Service Department's funded here?
It varies state to state. I have my relationships with my counterparts in other states are largely through the U.S. Climate Alliance. In other states, there are oftentimes climate advisors directly to the governors. Our governor chooses to use his cabinet members as advisors and policy experts, and our secretary, along with the commissioner of Public Service Department and others who have expertise, serve in that function. We don't have those like policy advisors per se. And then climate offices could, and this was something, and I'd be happy to find the recommendation and the memo that was used to stand up the climate office, but there was a lot of discussion about where our climate office should sit in Vermont. Should it sit in the agency of administration as one example in order to influence policy and decisions across all the agencies? And in the end, because we already had the Global Warming Solutions Act, which gave our secretary unique authority around climate and the sort of buck stops with our agency around meeting our emissions reductions targets and rulemaking, the decision was put forward to recommend the climate office sitting within the Agency of Natural Resources. And as I think I've mentioned in the past, we have an interagency advisory board that is stood up by delegates from all the other agencies. And our work really is to coordinate and amplify climate solutions across state government. And we work really closely with our other partners to do so. But yeah, the funding model can be different, I'm sure.
So I know we have more to talk about, but our next witness is here. And I do want to give folks our typical 5-minute break just before we hear. Is that okay, Jared?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for that great conversation. I think we can go off live.